Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're seeking calm, deep rest, and peaceful sleep, you're in the right place. Let's begin.
For more than 2,000 years, Zen Buddhist masters discovered something simple yet profound about the human mind. Tonight, we will go on a journey through ancient stories that uncover these secrets. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The teachings you will hear are not complicated philosophies or difficult practices. They are stories about ordinary people who discovered something extraordinary. Each one found peace not by achieving something special, but by seeing through a simple misunderstanding about how life works. You do not need to remember every detail or understand everything perfectly. As we move through these teachings together, you might notice your mind becoming quieter, your body releasing tension you did not know you were holding. This is not something you need to make happen. Relax. Take a slow, deep breath. And let's begin our journey together. In a mountain temple that had stood for 300 years lived a woman named Nami. She had taken on the role of temple keeper when her mother passed, and with that role came a weight she had never anticipated. Every morning, Nami would wake before dawn and begin her rounds. She checked every building for cracks in the walls. She examined every roof tile for signs of wear. She tested every floorboard for looseness and inspected every door frame for warping. The temple had been built by master craftsmen generations ago, and Nami felt the crushing responsibility of preserving their work. She kept detailed records of every repair, every weakness she discovered, every potential problem that might develop. At night, she would lie awake thinking about the weight of snow on the meditation hall roof, or whether the wooden posts in the main building were developing rot, or if the stone foundation might be shifting. Other monks at the temple noticed Nami's constant anxiety. They would invite her to evening tea or morning meditation, but she always declined. There was too much to check, too much to maintain, too many ways the temple could deteriorate if she let her vigilance slip even for a moment. She ate her meals quickly, barely tasting the food. She rushed through her own meditation practice, her mind cataloguing tasks rather than settling into stillness. Nami's face grew lined with worry. Her shoulders carried a permanent tension. She developed headaches that lasted for days. The other monks tried to help with repairs, but this only increased her anxiety. What if they missed something? What if they did not notice a crack forming or a beam weakening? The responsibility felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. One spring afternoon, as Nami was in the main hall inspecting the altar for dust and checking the incense holders for tarnish, the ground began to shake. At first it was gentle, almost like a strong wind moving through the building. Then it intensified. The wooden structure groaned and swayed. Roof tiles crashed to the ground outside. Nami heard the sharp crack of beams splitting. She ran outside as the shaking continued. All around her, pieces of the temple she had protected so carefully were falling. A section of the meditation hall's roof collapsed. The stone lanterns in the garden toppled over. The gate she had repaired just last month tilted at a dangerous angle. When the earthquake finally stopped, Nami stood in the courtyard, surrounded by debris. Everything she had worried about, everything she had tried so hard to prevent, had happened anyway. Years of anxious vigilance had not protected the temple from this moment. She walked slowly through the damage, expecting to feel devastated. But something strange happened instead. As Nami stepped over broken tiles and splintered wood, she felt a lightness she had not experienced in years. The thing she had feared most had occurred, and she was still standing. The temple was damaged, but not destroyed. The buildings could be repaired. And in this moment of actual crisis, her mind was suddenly, surprisingly clear. She sat down on a fallen beam and looked at the temple with new eyes. For the first time in years, she was not checking for problems or planning repairs. She was simply present with what was. And in that presence, she noticed something she had missed in all her years of anxious maintenance. The temple was beautiful. Even damaged, even broken, it held a kind of grace. The other monks emerged from where they had taken shelter and began helping each other, checking that everyone was safe. Master Soyen, the head teacher, came to sit beside Nami on the fallen beam. He did not speak, just sat with her in the rubble. After a long silence, Nami said, "I spent years trying to prevent this." "Yes," Soyen replied gently. "I thought if I watched carefully enough, worried enough, checked everything constantly, I could keep the temple perfect." "And now?" Nami looked around at the damaged buildings. "Now I see that the temple was never the fragile thing I thought it was. These buildings have survived 300 years, including earthquakes worse than this one. They did not need my anxiety to protect them." "What did need your anxiety?" Soyen asked. Nami considered this question. "Nothing needed it. I thought my worry was protection, but it was just suffering I added to life." That evening, as the monks worked together to clear debris and make temporary repairs, Nami found herself actually enjoying the work. Without the weight of trying to prevent all possible damage, she could simply respond to what was actually needed right now. Her hands moved with a lightness they had never had when driven by fear. In the weeks that followed, as the temple was rebuilt, Nami continued her role as keeper. But her approach had completely transformed. She still checked the buildings and made necessary repairs, but without the desperate, anxious quality that had consumed her before. She could see a crack in a wall and simply fix it, without that crack becoming a symbol of her inadequacy or a harbinger of complete collapse. When new monks asked Nami for advice about temple maintenance, she would tell them about the earthquake. "I learned that what we try to protect through worry is often stronger than we imagine," she would say. "And the weight we carry trying to prevent every problem is heavier than any actual problem we will face." Master Soyen, watching Nami's transformation, would sometimes point her out to students as an example of a profound teaching. "She discovered something that many people never learn," he would tell them. "The things we protect most anxiously often need our care, not our fear. When we release the burden of trying to control what cannot be controlled, we find we can respond to what actually is with much more clarity and grace." This story from the Zen Buddhist tradition reveals something essential about the nature of mental burdens. Nami believed that her constant worry was a form of responsibility, a way of caring for something precious. But what she discovered through the earthquake was that anxiety and care are not the same thing. Her worry had not protected the temple. It had only separated her from actually experiencing the place she loved. In Zen Buddhism, there is a teaching about the difference between appropriate concern and unnecessary suffering. Appropriate concern allows us to take action when action is needed. It is clear and responsive. Unnecessary suffering is the weight of worry we add to situations, the mental rehearsals of disaster, the constant vigilance that exhausts us without actually preventing problems. Nami's story shows us that we often carry burdens that serve no purpose except to make us feel like we are doing something. We believe that if we worry enough, plan enough, mentally prepare for every possibility, we can control outcomes. But life, like earthquakes, often moves in directions we cannot anticipate or prevent. All our anxious preparation does not change this reality. What changed for Nami was not her circumstances, but her relationship to those circumstances. She still cared for the temple. She still made repairs and maintained the buildings. But she had released the crushing weight of believing that her anxiety was what kept everything safe. This release allowed her to be more present, more effective, and more at peace. This teaching has particular relevance as we prepare for sleep. Many of us lie awake carrying the same kind of burden Nami carried. We mentally check every aspect of our lives for problems. We worry about what might go wrong tomorrow or next week. We replay conversations and situations, searching for what we should have done differently. This mental maintenance feels important, like we are being responsible. But it is often just exhausting ourselves without changing anything. The Zen approach suggests that we can care for our lives and responsibilities without carrying the weight of constant anxiety. We can be attentive and responsive when action is needed, while releasing the mental burden of trying to prevent every possible problem through worry. Like Nami sitting in the rubble, we might discover that what we have been protecting so anxiously is actually stronger and more resilient than we imagined. Along the coastal roads of ancient Japan traveled a merchant named Taro. He was known throughout the region for his success in trade. His warehouses were filled with silk, tea, porcelain, and spices from distant lands. He owned 3 trading ships that sailed regularly between ports, bringing him steady wealth. Taro's reputation had been built over 20 years of careful planning, shrewd negotiations, and what he considered intelligent risk-taking. The foundation of Taro's success was his caution. He never put all his goods in one shipment. He always kept detailed records. He maintained relationships with important officials and merchants in every port. He spent hours each day reviewing his accounts, checking his inventory, and planning his next moves. This careful attention had served him well, protecting him from the disasters that befell less cautious traders. But over the years, something had shifted. Taro's caution had gradually transformed into something else. He found himself lying awake at night, calculating profit margins and worrying about storms at sea. He stopped taking pleasure in the beautiful objects he traded, seeing them only as assets to be moved and sold. His relationships had become transactional. He evaluated every person he met for their potential usefulness to his business. Taro's wife had tried to talk with him about his increasing obsession with wealth. His children barely knew him because he was always preoccupied with business matters. But Taro believed that this single-minded focus was necessary. Once he had achieved complete financial security, he told himself, then he could relax and enjoy life. First, he needed to build his fortune to a point where nothing could threaten it. One autumn, Taro decided to take a rare journey himself rather than sending agents. His largest ship was carrying his most valuable cargo yet. 3 years of careful planning and negotiation had gone into this shipment. If it arrived safely, the profit would secure his family's future for generations. He would finally reach the point of absolute security he had been striving toward. The voyage began smoothly. The seas were calm, the winds favorable. Taro stood on the deck, mentally calculating the selling price of each item in the hold below. He imagined the respect he would command with such wealth. He thought about the larger ships he could buy, the expanded trade routes he could establish. This was the culmination of everything he had worked for. 3 days from their destination port, the sky began to change. Experienced sailors recognized the signs of a major storm approaching. The captain ordered everything secured and assured Taro they had weathered worse. But as darkness fell, the storm intensified beyond anything the captain had seen. Massive waves crashed over the deck. The wind tore at the sails. The ship pitched and rolled in the violent sea. Taro clung to a rope in the cargo hold, listening to the sound of crates breaking loose and cargo shifting. He thought about the silk being ruined by seawater, the porcelain shattering, the tea being destroyed. 20 years of work was being demolished by wind and wave. His carefully constructed future was disintegrating with each crash of water against the hull. Near dawn, the ship struck something beneath the surface. The impact threw Taro across the hold. He heard the terrible sound of wood splintering. Cold seawater began pouring in. The sailors were shouting. The ship was sinking. Taro tried to save what he could, grabbing at floating crates, but the water was rising too fast. He barely made it to the deck before the ship went down. Sailors pulled him into a small boat they had managed to launch. Through the grey morning light, Taro watched his ship disappear beneath the waves. Everything he owned, everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed relationships and peace of mind to accumulate, was gone. The small boat eventually reached a rocky shore. The survivors pulled themselves onto the beach, exhausted and soaked. Some were injured. All were in shock. Taro sat on the sand, staring at the empty horizon where his ship had been. His mind felt strangely blank. The calculations that usually filled every moment had stopped. There was nothing left to calculate. As the sun rose fully above the ocean, Taro noticed something. The light on the water was beautiful. He could not remember the last time he had really looked at sunlight on waves. The sound of the tide coming in had a rhythm to it. A group of seabirds was calling to each other as they searched for food in the shallow water. The warmth of the sun on his wet clothes felt good. For the first time in 20 years, Taro was completely present in a single moment. Not planning, not calculating, not worrying about the future or regretting the past. Just sitting on a beach in the morning sun, alive and breathing. And in that unwanted, unplanned moment, he felt something he had not experienced since he was a young man just starting out in trade. He felt light. One of the other survivors, an old sailor named Kenji, came to sit beside him. They sat in silence for a while, watching the waves. Finally, Kenji said, "I have been through 3 shipwrecks in my life. Lost everything each time. Built it back twice. Third time, I decided to stop accumulating things to lose." "What do you mean?" Taro asked. "I still work. I still earn. But I stopped believing that having more things would make me secure. The ocean taught me that security is an illusion. Everything we have can disappear in a moment. The only thing that lasts is how we meet each moment while we are still here to meet it." Taro thought about this as they waited on the beach for help to arrive. He had spent decades building walls of wealth around himself, believing they would protect him from life's uncertainty. But life had simply washed over those walls as easily as the ocean had taken his ship. All his careful planning, all his sacrifices, all his anxiety had not prevented this moment. But something unexpected had survived the shipwreck. Taro himself was still here. His capacity to breathe, to see, to experience life had not been in the cargo hold. It had been with him all along, unaffected by his fortune or its loss. The sunrise was just as beautiful when he had nothing as it would have been when he had everything. Perhaps more beautiful, because now he was actually seeing it. When help finally arrived and the survivors were taken to the nearest village, Taro began the long journey home with nothing but the wet clothes on his back. As he walked, he noticed things he had not paid attention to in years. The way light filtered through trees, the smell of rain on dry ground, the taste of plain rice when he was truly hungry. These simple experiences had been available all along, but he had been too preoccupied with accumulation to notice them. By the time Taro reached his home, his wife barely recognized him. Not because his appearance had changed so dramatically, though it had, but because there was a quality in his eyes that had been absent for many years. A presence, an openness, a capacity to actually see her rather than looking past her to the next business concern. "I lost everything," he told her. She touched his face gently. "Did you? You seem to have found something." Taro smiled, understanding what she meant. "I have been so busy trying to become secure that I forgot I was alive. It took losing everything to remember." In the years that followed, Taro rebuilt his trading business, but his relationship to it had completely changed. He still worked hard and made good decisions, but the desperate quality was gone. He could hold success lightly, knowing it was temporary. He spent evenings with his family, actually present with them. He took pleasure in the work itself, rather than just its results. And he never again mistook accumulation for security or wealth for peace. When younger merchants would ask Taro for advice, he would sometimes tell them about the shipwreck. "I thought losing everything would destroy me," he would say. "Instead, it freed me. I learned that what I really needed was much simpler than what I thought I wanted. The shipwreck did not take away my life. It gave it back to me." The story of Taro the merchant speaks to a particular kind of burden that many of us carry, one that Zen Buddhism addresses directly. This is the burden of accumulation, the weight of believing that our security and worth come from what we possess or achieve. Taro spent 20 years of his life building walls of wealth around himself, sacrificing presence and relationship in pursuit of a security that ultimately proved to be an illusion. What makes this teaching relevant to our modern lives is how universal this pattern is. We may not be trading silk and porcelain, but we accumulate other things. Accomplishments, qualifications, status symbols, savings accounts, possessions, or even spiritual achievements. We build these up believing they will eventually make us feel safe, complete, and at peace. But like Taro, we often discover that the accumulation itself prevents us from experiencing the peace we seek. The Zen insight here is subtle but profound. It is not that work, success, or material comfort are wrong or should be rejected. Taro continued his business after the shipwreck. The teaching is about our relationship to these things. When we believe that our well-being depends on accumulating and protecting what we have, we create a kind of prison. Every possession becomes something we must guard. Every achievement becomes something we must maintain. Every bit of security becomes something we must defend. Taro's transformation began not when he lost everything, but when he stopped in that moment on the beach and actually experienced what was present. The sunlight, the sound of waves, the simple fact of being alive. These experiences had always been available to him, but his mind had been too occupied with mental calculations about future security to notice them. The shipwreck did not give him anything new. It took away the burden that had been preventing him from experiencing what was already here. The Zen approach suggests that this vigilance is based on a misunderstanding. We believe that thinking about these things, worrying about them, mentally managing them, is what keeps them secure. But, like Taro's careful planning could not prevent the storm, our mental activity at night cannot actually protect what we value. It only prevents us from resting. There is a deeper teaching here about what actually provides security. Taro discovered that the thing he had been seeking through accumulation was present all along in his capacity to meet each moment fully. This capacity could not be lost in a shipwreck because it was not dependent on external circumstances. The peace he found on that beach was not created by having nothing. It emerged when his attention was no longer absorbed in protecting what he had. The beautiful paradox of Zen Buddhism is that when we release our grip on security, we often discover a deeper kind of safety. Not the brittle security that comes from building walls of protection, but the flexible resilience that comes from knowing we can meet whatever life brings. Like Taro sitting on the beach after losing everything, we might find that what survives every loss is our fundamental capacity to be present, to breathe, to experience this moment exactly as it is. Tonight, as you release into sleep, you can practice letting go of what you have been trying so hard to hold. Not abandoning your responsibilities or your care for what matters, but releasing the exhausting grip of believing that your mental vigilance is what keeps everything safe. In this release, you might discover the same lightness that Taro found. The peace that comes not from having accumulated enough, but from recognizing that what you most deeply need has been here all along, waiting for you to stop reaching long enough to notice it. In a small fishing village on the eastern coast lived a man named Isamu who had fished the same waters for 30 years. Unlike the other fishermen who relied on intuition and experience, Isamu had developed what he considered a scientific approach to his work. He kept detailed journals of every catch, noting the moon phase, the tide, the wind direction, the water temperature, and dozens of other variables. Over the years, Isamu had filled 20 thick books with observations and calculations. He had charts showing which bait worked best under different conditions. He had diagrams of current patterns and maps marking the most productive fishing spots. He spent hours each week studying his records, looking for patterns that would help him predict where the fish would be. Other fishermen found Isamu's methods strange. Old Takeshi, who had been fishing these waters for 50 years, would shake his head when he saw Isamu consulting his charts before heading out. "The sea does not read your books," Takeshi would say. But Isamu believed his systematic approach gave him an advantage. He was not just fishing. He was solving a puzzle. The problem was that Isamu's catches had been declining for several years. Despite all his data and careful planning, he was bringing in less fish than the other fishermen who simply went out each morning and trusted their instincts. This frustrated Isamu deeply. He had more information than anyone else. He had studied the patterns more carefully. Why was his knowledge not translating into results? Isamu responded by collecting even more data. He began noting cloud formations and bird behavior. He recorded water clarity and the presence of certain types of seaweed. He cross-referenced all these factors, searching for the hidden formula that would guarantee a good catch. His wife worried about him. He was sleeping less, spending more time poring over his journals by candlelight, muttering about variables he might have missed. One morning, Isamu woke to find that his journals had been damaged by rain that had blown through an open window during the night. Ink had run across pages, making his careful records illegible. Charts he had spent months creating were ruined. Years of accumulated data were destroyed. Isamu stood in his small house, looking at the soggy pages, feeling a desperation that surprised him with its intensity. His wife Yuki placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe this is a message," she said gently. "A message? I have lost years of work. Or maybe you have been freed from years of burden." Isamu did not understand what she meant, but he knew he needed to fish that day whether his records were intact or not. He walked down to his boat in a strange state of mind. Empty. Uncertain. For the first time in years, he had no plan, no strategy, no predictions based on his data. He felt naked without his system. He pushed his boat into the water and began rowing out, not toward any of his carefully marked spots, but simply in the direction that felt right. The morning was cool and still. Mist hung over the water. Without his journals to consult, Isamu found himself simply present with the experience of being on the sea. He noticed things he had not paid attention to in years. The way the current moved against his oars had a particular feel to it today. The sound of water against the hull had a rhythm. There was a quality to the air, a kind of weight or lightness that he could sense but not name. These were not things that could be measured or recorded. They were felt experiences that required his full presence to perceive. Without consciously deciding to, Isamu found himself adjusting his course based on these subtle sensations. He was not thinking about where he should go according to his data. He was simply following something he could not articulate. When he felt a slight change in the water's movement, he stopped rowing. This spot was not marked on any of his maps. His records gave no reason why fish would be here today. But something about it felt right. Isamu lowered his nets. Within an hour, he had caught more fish than he had caught in the previous 3 trips combined. He pulled in net after net, his boat filling with a bounty that shocked him. This made no sense according to his careful analysis. Nothing in his journals would have predicted this outcome. Yet, here it was, undeniable and abundant. As Isamu rowed back toward shore with his heavy catch, he began to understand what had happened. For years, he had been trying to control the sea through knowledge. He had believed that if he could gather enough information, calculate enough variables, he could predict and control his results. But the sea was not a puzzle to be solved. It was a living, moving reality that changed constantly in ways too subtle and complex to capture in charts. What he had done differently today was not use better information. He had stopped trying to control the outcome and instead had opened himself to what was actually present. The fishermen like old Takeshi, who consistently caught fish, were not smarter or more skilled. They were simply more present to the reality of the sea in each moment, able to sense and respond to what was happening now rather than what their analysis said should be happening. When Isamu reached the shore, Takeshi was there mending his nets. The old fisherman looked at Isamu's catch and smiled. "Good day on the water?" "The best in years," Isamu admitted. "But I did nothing according to my plans. I just followed what felt right." Takeshi nodded. Sometimes the harder we try to control something, the more it slips away from us. The sea has its own intelligence. Our job is not to command it, but to dance with it. Over the following weeks, Isamu continued fishing without consulting his journals. Some days the catch was good, some days modest, some days poor. But he noticed he no longer felt the same anxiety about results. He was learning to read the sea directly rather than through the filter of his recorded knowledge. He paid attention to sensations he could not name or measure. His body learned to feel when conditions were right, when to stay out longer, when to return early. The other fishermen began to notice a change in Isamu. He moved differently on the water, with less rigid planning and more fluid responsiveness. His face had lost the tight, anxious expression he had worn for years. When younger fishermen asked him for advice, expecting complex instructions about tides and moon phases, he would tell them, "Study the basics, but then learn to forget what you studied." The real teaching comes from the water itself. One day, Isamu took his stack of water-damaged journals and placed them in his small fire. As the pages burned, he felt no regret. Those records had represented years of trying to control what could not be controlled. They had been his attempt to make fishing safe and predictable, to eliminate uncertainty through knowledge. But fishing was not supposed to be safe or predictable. It was a relationship with something wild and alive, and relationships require presence, not control. "What did you learn from all those years of record keeping?" Yuki asked him as they watched the last of the journals burn. Isamu thought about this. "I learned what does not work. I learned that trying to control the sea through knowledge is like trying to hold water in a net. The tighter you grip, the more slips through. What works is feeling the rhythm of the moment and moving with it." Years later, when Isamu was an old man himself, young fishermen would sometimes ask him to teach them his method. He would laugh and say, "I have no method. That is the method." The moment you believe you have figured out the sea, you have lost your connection to it. Stay present, trust what you feel, respond to what is actually here. The sea will teach you everything else. This story of Isamu the fisherman speaks to something that Zen Buddhism addresses directly: the illusion of control through knowledge and planning. Isamu believed that if he gathered enough information and analyzed it carefully enough, he could predict outcomes and ensure success. This is a very human tendency. We feel anxious about uncertainty, so we try to eliminate it through understanding and preparation. But what Isamu discovered is that some things in life cannot be controlled through mental effort. The sea, with its countless variables and constant change, is like life itself. Too complex, too alive, too responsive to factors we cannot measure or predict. Our attempts to control it through analysis often separate us from the direct experience that would allow us to respond appropriately. Sleep, like the sea, is a natural process that responds to presence more than to control. The more we try to force it, analyze it, or manage it through our conscious efforts, the more it tends to slip away. Sleep comes most easily when we stop trying to make it happen and instead create conditions that allow it to arrive naturally. What conditions allow sleep to come? Not elaborate techniques or rigid control, but a kind of gentle letting go. A willingness to be present with whatever we are experiencing right now without needing to manage it. A trust in the body's natural intelligence to move toward rest when we stop interfering with anxious effort. Isamu's discovery about fishing applies to rest. There is a rhythm to each evening, a particular quality to this specific moment of settling into bed that cannot be predicted by general rules or past experience. Tonight is not last night. This breath is not the previous breath. When we stay present to what is actually here now, rather than trying to control our experience based on what we think should happen, we often find that the natural process of rest begins on its own. In the mountain region of old Japan lived a man named Tadashi, who was known throughout the province as a master archer. People would travel for days to watch him demonstrate his skill. He could hit a target no larger than a plum from 100 paces. He could split an arrow that was already embedded in the target. His accuracy was so perfect that other archers spoke of him with awe. Tadashi's entire identity was built around his archery. He had started learning as a young boy and had practiced every single day for 40 years. His self-worth, his reputation, his sense of purpose all came from this one skill. People respected him because of what he could do with a bow. He respected himself for the same reason. The bow was not just a tool for Tadashi. It was an extension of his body, his mind, his very being. He knew every grain of the wood, every subtle variation in different arrows, every adjustment needed for wind or distance. When he drew the bow and released, there was no gap between intention and result. Target and arrow became one through the perfection of his skill. Then, in his 52nd year, Tadashi fell ill with a fever that lasted for many weeks. The healers did what they could, but the fever damaged something in his eyes. When he finally recovered, his vision was changed. Everything appeared blurry and indistinct. He could no longer see clearly enough to aim with any accuracy. At first, Tadashi believed his vision would gradually improve as his body fully healed. He waited impatiently, holding his bow but not practicing, unable to bear the thought of missing targets he had once hit effortlessly. But weeks passed, then months, and his vision remained compromised. The healers finally told him the truth. This was permanent. He would never see clearly again. Tadashi fell into a despair deeper than any he had known. Without his archery, who was he? What purpose did his life have? He felt like a tree that had been cut down, still standing, but no longer alive. His wife tried to comfort him, reminding him of all the other aspects of his life. He had a family who loved him, a home, many years still ahead of him. But Tadashi could not hear her. He was the archer. Without archery, he was nothing. For months, Tadashi barely left his home. He avoided other people, ashamed of his loss. His bow sat untouched in the corner. He could not bear to look at it. The life he had built so carefully had been taken from him by an illness he could not control, and he felt completely lost. One day, a traveling monk named Daiki came through the village and heard about Tadashi's situation. Against Tadashi's wishes, his wife invited the monk to visit. Tadashi was cold and unwelcoming when Daiki arrived. He did not want sympathy or religious platitudes about accepting his fate. But Daiki did not offer sympathy. Instead, he asked, "May I see your bow?" Reluctantly, Tadashi brought out his bow. Daiki examined it carefully, feeling the weight, testing the draw. "A fine instrument," he said. "Will you show me your stance?" "I cannot shoot anymore," Tadashi said bitterly. "I am blind." "I did not ask you to shoot," Daiki replied. "I asked you to show me your stance." Something about the monk's tone made Tadashi comply. He took the bow and moved into the position he had held thousands of times. Even without intending to shoot, his body knew what to do. His feet found their placement, his spine aligned, his shoulders settled. "Now draw the bow," Daiki said. "Without a target, there is no point." Humor an old monk. Tadashi drew the bow back, feeling the familiar resistance of the string, the way his muscles engaged in a pattern they had repeated 10,000 times. For a moment, he felt a flicker of the old satisfaction. Then it faded, replaced by bitterness. What good was the form without the function? "What do you feel when you hold this position?" Daiki asked. "Nothing. Emptiness. Loss." "Look more carefully. Not with your eyes. What do you feel in your body?" Tadashi was about to dismiss the question, but something made him pause and actually pay attention. He felt the tension in the string, the engagement of muscles in his back and shoulders, the slight compression of his spine, the connection of his feet to the ground, the way his breathing naturally slowed and deepened in this posture. "I feel the bow," he said slowly. "I feel my body holding it. I feel stillness, balance. And where is the target in all of this?" Daiki asked. Tadashi opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. The target was not in any of what he was feeling. The target was somewhere else, outside, separate. What he was experiencing in this moment was entirely internal. The bow, his body, the present sensation of this exact position. "The target is separate from the experience of drawing the bow," Tadashi said, beginning to see where the monk was leading him. "For 40 years, you have been focused on the target," Daiki said gently. "You believed the purpose of archery was to hit what you aimed at. But what if archery was never about the target at all? Then what is it about? You tell me. You are the one holding the bow." Over the following weeks, Tadashi began to practice in a new way. Not shooting at targets, but simply drawing and holding the bow. At first, this felt pointless and frustrating. But gradually, something began to shift. Without the goal of hitting a target to distract him, he became aware of aspects of archery he had never noticed before. He discovered that he had been holding a slight tension in his left shoulder for 40 years. He felt the way his mind would subtly grasp for the release before his body was fully ready. He noticed how his breathing could either fight against or flow with the draw of the bow. These were things he had never perceived when all his attention was focused on the external target. One evening, as Tadashi held the drawn bow in his usual practice spot, something extraordinary happened. For a brief moment, there was no separation between himself and the bow. No archer holding an instrument, no person trying to perfect a skill. Just the unified experience of this exact moment, complete in itself. The sensation was so surprising and profound that he released the string without meaning to. The arrow flew off into the darkness. Tadashi had no idea where it went. But for the first time since losing his vision, he felt a sense of completeness. Not accomplishment or achievement, but a wholeness that had nothing to do with hitting targets. When Daiki visited again, Tadashi tried to explain what he had experienced. "I spent 40 years as an archer," he said, "but I never understood archery until I could no longer aim." "What did you understand?" Daiki asked. "That what I was seeking through archery was always in the archery itself, not in hitting targets. The stillness, the presence, the unity I felt. These were here all along. I just could not feel them because I was always looking past the present moment toward the desired outcome." Daiki smiled. And now? Now I practice every day and I never hit a target. But I am more of an archer than I ever was before. This became Tadashi's new life. Each day he would practice drawing his bow, not to accomplish anything but simply to experience the deep presence that came from being fully with the action itself. Other archers who heard about this thought he had gone mad. But occasionally, one would try his method and discover what he had found. Years later, when Tadashi was an old man, a young archer came to him seeking to improve his competition results. He had heard Tadashi had been a great master and hoped for technical advice. "I can offer you nothing that will help you hit targets," Tadashi said. "But I can show you something that might help you understand why you want to." "I want to win," the young man said. "Is that not obvious? And when you win, what will you have?" "Pride, recognition, proof of my skill. And these things will make you complete?" The young man hesitated. "I believe they will make me happy." Tadashi smiled. "I believed the same thing. It took losing everything to discover that what I was seeking through achievement was never in the achievement itself. It was in the practice, in the presence, in the simple experience of being fully engaged with this moment. You can learn this now through understanding, or later through loss. Either way, the teaching is the same. The story of Tadashi, the archer, reveals a teaching that runs deep through Zen Buddhism. The illusion that our peace and wholeness come from achieving external goals. Tadashi spent 40 years as a master archer, but his mastery was always incomplete because it depended on outcomes. He could hit targets perfectly, but his identity and self-worth were tied to that ability. When illness took away his vision, he felt he had lost everything because he believed he was his achievement. What Tadashi discovered through his forced limitation was something that achievement had hidden from him. The peace he had been seeking through perfect archery was not in hitting targets. It was in the experience of being fully present with the practice itself. When he could no longer focus on external results, he finally encountered the internal reality that had been there all along. This teaching addresses a particular form of control that many of us exercise without realizing it. We try to control how we feel about ourselves through achievement. We believe that if we can just accomplish enough, prove ourselves sufficiently, demonstrate our worth through results, then we will finally feel complete and at peace. But like Tadashi, we discover that this approach creates a fragile peace that depends on circumstances staying favorable. Zen Buddhism points to a different kind of wholeness, one that does not depend on achievement, circumstances, or any external validation. This wholeness is not created through effort. It is recognized through presence. When Tadashi stopped trying to hit targets and simply experienced the fullness of drawing the bow, he touched something that had been available all along but hidden by his goal orientation. The teaching here is not that goals and achievements are wrong or should be abandoned. It is about where we locate our sense of wholeness. When we believe we will be complete once we achieve something, we are always waiting for that future moment rather than recognizing the completeness available right now. This creates a restless striving that prevents the very peace we seek. What would it mean to approach rest the way Tadashi learned to approach archery? Not as something we achieve through proper technique or earn through adequate performance, but as an experience we enter simply by being present with what is here now. Sleep is not a target to hit or a goal to accomplish. It is a natural process that unfolds when we stop trying to control it through achievement. The deeper teaching is about control itself. Tadashi had to lose his ability to control his aim before he could discover what archery was really about. Sometimes we need to lose our grip on control before we can find what control was preventing us from experiencing. This does not mean we should seek limitation or loss. It means we might practice releasing control voluntarily rather than waiting for life to force the lesson on us. Tadashi's discovery offers permission to stop aiming. You do not need to hit the target of perfect sleep or achieve the goal of immediate unconsciousness. You can simply be present with whatever this moment of rest feels like, allowing it to be complete in itself rather than a means to some other end. In this presence without purpose, sleep often arrives on its own, not as an achievement, but as a natural unfolding of your willingness to be exactly where you are. In a large monastery that housed more than 100 monks lived a woman named Ren who served as the head cook. Her position was one of great responsibility. She had to prepare 3 meals a day for the entire community, manage supplies, supervise kitchen helpers, and ensure that every meal met the strict standards of monastic life. From before dawn until after dark, Ren worked without pause. Ren had held this position for 15 years. She was known for her efficiency and her ability to produce large quantities of food quickly. She could dice vegetables at remarkable speed, judge cooking times perfectly without measuring, and coordinate multiple dishes so that everything was ready at exactly the right moment. Other monasteries sometimes sent their cooks to learn from her methods. But despite her skill and dedication, Ren felt increasingly exhausted and disconnected. Cooking had become purely mechanical. Wake up, light the fires, prepare breakfast, clean, start lunch preparations, serve, clean, begin dinner, serve, clean, sleep. The same pattern every single day. She moved through her tasks like water flowing downhill, following the path of least resistance, her mind always 3 steps ahead of her hands. While chopping vegetables, Ren would be thinking about what needed to go into the soup. While stirring the soup, she would be planning the evening rice. While serving dinner, she would be mentally reviewing what supplies needed to be ordered. Her body was always in one moment while her mind raced ahead to the next task and the task after that. The other monks would compliment the food and Ren would accept their praise with a polite bow. But she had not actually tasted what she cooked in years. She knew the food was adequate because no one complained, but she had no direct experience of it. Tasting would have required stopping, being present, paying attention. There was no time for that when so much needed to be done. Ren's assistants noticed that she never seemed to enjoy the work. She was not harsh or unkind, but there was no lightness in her, no pleasure in the act of cooking. She approached the kitchen the way a farmer might approach an endless field that needed plowing. Necessary work to be completed, nothing more. One afternoon, Master Hakuin came into the kitchen. This was unusual. The head teacher rarely visited the kitchen, trusting Ren to manage her domain. He sat down on a stool near where Ren was preparing vegetables for the evening meal and simply watched her work. Ren felt self-conscious under his gaze. She tried to work as efficiently as possible, demonstrating her skill. Her knife moved rapidly through a pile of radishes, reducing them to thin, even slices. She was quite proud of how fast she could work. After watching for a while, Hakuin spoke. "Ren, what are you making?" "Vegetable soup for this evening, Master." "And what is in this soup?" Ren listed the ingredients without pausing in her cutting. Radish, onion, mushroom, greens, ginger, miso. Will it be good? It will be adequate, Master. The same soup we have had many times. Have you tasted it? Not yet. It is not finished cooking. I meant the radish you are cutting. Have you tasted it? Ren paused her knife. No, Master. I am just preparing it. Just preparing it, Hakuin repeated. Pick up a slice and taste it. Ren felt confused by this instruction. She was in the middle of preparing a meal for 100 people. There was no time for such things. But one did not refuse a direct request from the head teacher. She picked up a thin slice of radish and placed it in her mouth. For a moment, nothing happened. It was just radish, like countless other radishes she had prepared. Then Hakuin said, "Do not think about it. Just taste it." Ren stopped trying to identify or evaluate what she was tasting. She simply let herself experience the sensation. The sharp, clean flavor of the radish. The crisp texture. The slight coolness. The way the taste changed as she chewed, becoming sweeter. These were qualities she knew intellectually that radish possessed, but she had not actually experienced them in years. "What do you taste?" Hakuin asked. "Radish," Ren said, then realized how inadequate that answer was. "I taste this particular radish. This one, right now. It is slightly sweet. Very fresh. There is a sharpness to it, almost peppery. And the other radishes you have cut today, were they the same?" Ren looked at the pile of sliced radishes. "I do not know. I did not taste them." "So you do not actually know what you are cooking?" "I know the recipe, Master. I know what ingredients to use and how to prepare them. But you do not know this radish. You do not know this onion or this mushroom. You know ideas about cooking, but you are not present with the actual cooking." Something about this observation struck Ren deeply. She had been cooking for 15 years, but she had not been truly present for any of it. She had been moving through the motions, following learned patterns, her mind always somewhere other than where her body was. Over the following weeks, Hakuin would occasionally visit the kitchen and ask Ren to stop and taste something. At first, this felt like an interruption, an inefficient use of time. But gradually, Ren began to notice something changing. When she actually tasted the ingredients she was working with, her cooking improved. She could tell if the greens were slightly bitter and needed more balancing sweetness. She could detect when the miso had developed particular depth of flavor that changed what else the soup needed. More than that, she began to take actual pleasure in cooking. When she was fully present with the act of cutting a vegetable, feeling the knife move through it, noticing the smell released by each cut, the work became something other than a task to complete. It became an experience to have. One morning, Ren was making rice gruel for breakfast. This was the simplest, most basic dish she prepared. She had made it thousands of times. But this morning, she was completely present with the process. She felt the texture of the rice grains in her hand as she measured them. She watched the water come to a boil, noticing the changes in how it moved. She smelled the subtle, sweet aroma as the rice cooked. She stirred slowly, feeling the resistance of the thickening gruel against her spoon. When she tasted it before serving, Ren experienced something she had never felt in all her years of cooking. The simple gruel tasted extraordinary. not because she had done anything different in its preparation, but because she was actually fully tasting it for the first time. The sweetness of the rice, the perfect texture, the warmth. It was completely satisfying despite its simplicity. That day, several monks commented that breakfast had been especially good. "What did you do differently?" one asked. Ren smiled. "I was there while I made it." Master Hakuin happened to overhear this exchange. Later, he spoke with Ren in the kitchen. "You have discovered something important," he said. "I have been cooking all these years," Ren told him, "but I was never really cooking. I was just moving through a task, trying to get to the next moment. Now I understand that this moment, this radish, this pot of rice, this is what cooking actually is. Everything I thought I was rushing toward was already here." "And how does this change your work?" "It is strange," Ren said. "I thought that stopping to pay attention would make me slower, less efficient. But I am just as fast, maybe faster, because I am not wasting energy thinking about what comes next. And the work itself feels completely different. It is no longer something to endure. It is something to experience." From that day forward, Ren approached her position differently. She still worked hard and managed her responsibilities well. But there was a presence to her work that had been absent before. Other monks began to notice a change in the food quality. The meals were not more elaborate or made with different ingredients, but something about them had shifted. They tasted more alive, more nourishing. When young monks would come to the kitchen to help, Ren would teach them not just techniques, but presence. "Do not think about finishing," she would tell them. "Think about this carrot you are peeling right now. Is it fresh? Is it sweet? What does your knife need to do to work with its particular texture?" When you are fully here with what is actually in your hands, the work takes care of itself. Years later, when a new cook was being trained to eventually take Ren's place, the young woman complained about how overwhelming the position seemed. There is so much to remember, so much to keep track of. "How do you manage it all?" Ren laughed gently. "I do not manage it all. I manage this one task right now. Then the next task when it comes. When you try to hold everything in your mind at once, you become exhausted and miss what is actually here. But when you give your full attention to this one radish, this one pot, this one moment, you discover you have everything you need." The story of Ren the cook speaks to something that Zen Buddhism addresses directly. The way we live in time, or more accurately, the way we do not live in the present time, but in our mental projections of future moments. Ren spent 15 years cooking without ever being fully present with the act of cooking. Her body was in the kitchen, but her mind was always somewhere ahead, planning the next step, worrying about what needed to be done. This pattern is not unique to cooking or to monastery kitchens. It is how most of us move through our days. We eat breakfast while thinking about the morning's tasks. We work while mentally rehearsing future conversations. We spend time with people while our minds catalogue what we need to do next. We are physically present, but mentally absent, and this absence means we never fully experience the lives we are living. What Master Hakuin taught Ren through the simple act of tasting a radish was that life only happens in the present moment. Not the idea of the present moment or the concept of being present, but the actual direct experience of what is here right now. The taste of this radish, the feeling of this knife in hand, the smell of this cooking rice. These experiences are not preparation for some future moment of real living. They are real living itself. The teaching has a particular quality in Zen Buddhism. It is not about trying to be present or working hard to pay attention. Those are just more forms of mental effort that keep us in our heads. It is more like allowing ourselves to taste what we have been too busy to taste, to feel what we have been too distracted to feel, to see what we have been looking past in our rush toward what comes next. Ren discovered that being present did not make her slower or less capable. In fact, it made her more effective because she was not wasting energy on mental time travel. When we give full attention to what we are actually doing, we often perform better than when we split our attention between the present task and thoughts about future tasks. But the deeper gift of presence is not increased efficiency. It is the recovery of our actual life. Ren had spent 15 years in a kitchen preparing food, but she had not truly experienced those years. They had passed in a blur of automatic action and forward-thinking planning. When she learned to be present, she discovered that the life she had been rushing through in order to get somewhere was the life she had been seeking all along. This teaching connects directly to the challenge of finding rest. Sleep requires presence. It requires being here, now, in this bed, in this body, in this moment. But most of us bring the same pattern Ren had into our approach to rest. We lie down while our minds race ahead to tomorrow's concerns, or back to today's unfinished business. We are physically in bed, but mentally everywhere else. The racing mind at bedtime is not just random mental activity. It is the habit of living in time other than now. We have trained ourselves to always be planning, reviewing, preparing, analyzing. This constant mental motion served us during the day, or we believed it did. But we have not learned to turn it off when the time for action has passed and the time for rest has arrived. What Ren learned about cooking applies to sleep. We do not need to try hard to be present or force our minds to stay in this moment. That would be just another form of effort that prevents rest. Instead, we can gently invite our attention back to direct experience. The feeling of the bed supporting our body, the rhythm of our breathing, the weight of our head on the pillow. These sensations are only available now, in this moment, and when we rest our attention on them, the mind's habit of racing into other times naturally begins to quiet. As you continue settling now, you might experiment with Ren's discovery. What is actually here in this exact moment? Not what you think about this moment or what this moment means for tomorrow. Just the direct experience of now. The sounds you can hear. The sensations you can feel. The simple fact of breathing, of being alive, of resting. This is not preparation for sleep or a technique to achieve rest. This is rest itself, available right now, waiting for your attention to arrive home. In a village known for its ceramics lived a potter named Daichi, who had learned his craft from his father and grandfather before him. He had been working with clay for 30 years, producing bowls, cups, and vases that were sold throughout the region. His pieces were technically competent and serviceable, but they lacked something that the work of master potters possessed. A certain grace, a quality of life that made some ceramics feel precious while others felt merely adequate. This difference troubled Daichi deeply. He had studied the forms of great potters. He knew the proper techniques for centering clay, for pulling walls evenly, for creating clean lines. He practiced constantly, trying to perfect his skill. But no matter how precisely he followed the methods he had learned, his work remained ordinary. Functional, but not beautiful. Correct, but not inspired. Daichi decided the problem was that he was not working hard enough. He began staying in his workshop later each evening, making piece after piece, pushing himself to be more precise, more controlled. He gripped the clay firmly as he shaped it, using force to make it conform to his vision. His hands developed calluses and his shoulders ached from the tension he held while working. But the harder Daichi pushed, the worse his results became. Vessels that should have been smooth developed subtle irregularities. Bowls that should have been perfectly round became slightly misshapen. Most frustratingly, many pieces would crack during the drying process or shatter in the kiln. The clay seemed to be resisting him, refusing to cooperate, no matter how much effort he applied. His wife Suki watched her husband growing more frustrated and exhausted. "Perhaps you need to rest," she suggested one evening when she found him in the workshop long after dark, staring at yet another cracked bowl. "I cannot rest until I understand what I am doing wrong," Daichi replied. "There is a secret to this craft that I have not discovered. I just need to work harder, pay closer attention, control the clay more precisely." One day, a master potter named Ogata passed through the village on his way to deliver pieces to a wealthy patron. Daichi's neighbors urged him to ask the master for guidance. Reluctantly, hoping Ogata might reveal some technical secret, Daichi invited him to visit his workshop. Ogata examined several of Daichi's pieces, turning them slowly in his hands. "You have good technical knowledge," he said finally. "Your forms are correct, but there is too much fighting in this work. I can feel your struggle with the clay in every piece." "Fighting?" Daichi was confused. "I am trying to shape it properly, to make it conform to the correct forms." "Show me," Ogata said, gesturing to the potter's wheel. Daichi prepared a ball of clay and placed it on the wheel. He began centering it with his practiced movements, but Ogata stopped him almost immediately. "Watch your shoulders," the master said. Daichi realized his shoulders were hunched up near his ears, tight with tension. He tried to lower them, but they crept back up as soon as he returned his attention to the clay. "Your jaw," Ogata continued. Daichi became aware that he was clenching his teeth, his whole face tight with concentration. "Your hands. Look at how you grip the clay." Daichi saw that his fingers were pressed hard into the spinning clay, forcing it into position rather than guiding it. He was strangling the clay with effort. "This is why your pieces crack," Ogata explained. "You are making them with violence. The clay remembers this tension and later breaks under the stress you built into it. You believe you are controlling the clay, but actually you are fighting against its nature." "Then how should I work?" Daichi asked, feeling defeated. Instead of answering with words, Ogata asked for a piece of clay. He placed it on the wheel and began centering it. His movements looked almost casual, his shoulders relaxed, his face calm. Yet the clay responded to his touch with a willingness Daichi had never achieved. It seemed to want to take the shape Ogata was suggesting rather than resisting, as Daichi's clay always did. Daichi watched as the master pulled up the walls of what would become a bowl. His hands barely seemed to touch the clay, yet it rose evenly and smoothly. There was no visible effort, no tension, no force. Just gentle guidance and the clay's responsive movement. When Ogata finished, he had created in minutes what Daichi could not achieve in hours of struggle. The bowl was perfectly formed, its walls uniform, its shape graceful. More importantly, it had a quality of aliveness that Daichi's pieces lacked. It looked like it wanted to be exactly what it was. "The secret is not more effort," Ogata said, wiping his hands. "The secret is less interference. Clay wants to become pots. That is its nature. When you try to force it, you work against that nature. When you guide it gently and trust its responsiveness, you work with it. The pot makes itself. You just help it remember what it already knows how to be." After Ogata left, Daichi sat alone in his workshop, thinking about what he had seen. Everything he had believed about his craft was backwards. He had thought success required more control, more force, more effort. But the master had shown him that real mastery looked like no effort at all. It was not about dominating the clay, but about cooperating with it. The next morning, Daichi approached his wheel with trepidation. He prepared a ball of clay, but before beginning, he took several deep breaths and consciously relaxed his shoulders. He placed the clay on the wheel and began centering it, but this time he tried to use the lightest touch possible. At first, the clay wobbled and resisted. His instinct was to grip harder, to force it into position. Instead, he made his hands even softer, barely touching the spinning clay. Something unexpected happened. The clay began to center itself. It was as if it wanted to find its balance and just needed his hands to suggest the direction without blocking its movement. Within moments, it was centered more perfectly than anything he had achieved through force. Daichi felt a flutter of excitement, but also fear. This gentle approach felt wrong, like he was not really doing anything. He began pulling up the walls, keeping his touch as light as possible. Every instinct told him to press harder, to control the clay more firmly. But he remembered Ogata's demonstration and kept his hands soft. The vessel that emerged was different from anything he had made before. It was not perfect in a technical sense. One side was slightly thicker than the other. The rim had a subtle irregularity, but it had something his other work lacked. It looked alive. It looked like it had grown rather than been forced into shape. Over the following weeks, Daichi practiced this new way of working. It was far more difficult than he had imagined. Not physically difficult, but mentally challenging. His mind constantly wanted to take control, to force outcomes, to grip tighter. Letting go of this urge to control required a kind of strength he had never developed. The strength to do less rather than more. Many pieces still failed, but the failures were different now. They came from Daichi not trusting the process enough, from moments when he would panic and revert to forcing. Gradually, he learned to recognize the feeling of cooperation versus the feeling of control. Cooperation felt light, almost effortless. Control felt heavy and exhausting. One evening, Daichi was working on a large vase. It was the most ambitious piece he had attempted with this new approach. As he pulled the walls up, they began to wobble dangerously. His immediate instinct was to grip hard and force them straight. But he paused, took a breath, and instead barely touched the clay, just suggesting stability. The walls steadied themselves and continued rising smoothly. When the vase was finished, Daichi sat back and looked at it with wonder. It was beautiful in a way he had never achieved before. Not perfect, but somehow right. It had its own character, its own life. He realized that by trying less hard, by forcing less, he had finally allowed his true skill to emerge. After the vase was fired and came out of the kiln intact and beautiful, Suki held it up to the light. "This is different from your other work," she said. "What changed?" "I stopped fighting," Daichi told her. "For 30 years I have been trying to force clay to become what I thought it should be. Now I am learning to feel what it wants to become and just help it get there. The clay does most of the work. I just guide it." In the years that followed, Daichi's reputation grew. Potters from other villages came to study with him, expecting to learn advanced techniques. Instead, he taught them about softening their grip, about the difference between control and cooperation, about trusting the clay's own intelligence. Many found this teaching frustratingly simple. They wanted complex methods, not permission to do less. But those who truly understood what Daichi was teaching discovered their own transformation. Their work became more graceful, more alive. They made fewer pieces that cracked or shattered because there was less internal stress built into them. And they found the work itself becoming pleasurable rather than a struggle. When people would compliment Daichi on his beautiful ceramics, he would smile and say, "I make nothing. I just help the clay remember what it already knows how to be." The secret to any craft is learning when to act and when to get out of the way. The story of Daichi, the potter, reveals a teaching that runs throughout Zen Buddhism, but often contradicts what we believe about achievement and success. We live in a world that celebrates effort, willpower, and determination. We are taught that if we are not succeeding, we need to try harder. But Daichi discovered that sometimes trying harder is exactly what prevents success. The problem with force is that it works against the natural intelligence of whatever we are trying to shape or change. Clay has properties, a nature, a way it wants to move when spun on a wheel. When Daichi tried to override this nature with sheer force, he created internal stresses that later caused his pieces to fail. When he learned to work with the clay's nature, trusting its responsiveness and using minimal intervention, the clay could express its full potential. This teaching applies far beyond pottery. We use force in our relationships, trying to make people be different than they are. We use force with our own minds and bodies, trying to override our natural rhythms and needs. We use force in approaching problems, pushing harder when our initial efforts do not work. And like Daichi's cracked bowls, these applications of force often create more problems than they solve. The Zen insight is that there is a difference between effort and force. Effort is responsive action, doing what is actually needed in this moment. Force is compulsive action, doing more because we believe more is always better. Effort works with the nature of things. Force works against it. Master Ogata's pottery looked effortless, not because he was not doing anything, but because he was doing exactly what was needed and nothing more. This distinction between effort and force is particularly relevant to sleep. Most people who struggle with sleep have tried very hard to fix the problem. They have implemented elaborate routines, followed strict rules, used various techniques. They are trying to force sleep to happen. But sleep, like clay on a wheel, has its own nature. It responds to gentle invitation, not forceful demand. When we lie in bed trying hard to fall asleep, we create the same kind of tension Daichi put into his pottery. We grip our relaxation tightly. We force our minds to be quiet. We control our breathing in rigid patterns. All of this effort works against sleep's natural movement. Sleep wants to come, but our forceful trying blocks its arrival. The teaching suggests a different approach. Instead of trying harder to sleep, we might try softer. Instead of forcing relaxation, we might allow it. Instead of controlling every aspect of our rest, we might trust the body's natural intelligence to find its way towards sleep when we stop interfering. This does not mean being passive or giving up. It means learning to distinguish between helpful action and counterproductive force. Creating a comfortable environment is helpful. Lying down at a reasonable time is helpful. Forcing yourself to relax is counterproductive. Gripping tightly to techniques is counterproductive. Fighting against wakefulness is counterproductive. Daichi's breakthrough came when he made his touch lighter, not stronger. When he trusted the clay to respond rather than forcing it to obey. The same principle applies to rest. When we make our approach to sleep lighter, trusting the body to move toward rest rather than forcing it to sleep, we often find that sleep comes more easily than when we tried so hard. As you continue settling now, notice if there is forcing in your approach. Are you trying hard to relax? Gripping tightly to the idea of falling asleep? Pushing against thoughts that arise? These are all forms of the same force that Daichi used on his clay. What might happen if you softened that grip? What might happen if you trusted that rest wants to come, that your body knows how to sleep, that you do not need to force this process, but just allow it? The wisdom is not about doing nothing. It is about doing less than you think is necessary, about trusting natural processes more than forced control. Like clay that centers itself when given gentle guidance, your body and mind can find their way toward rest when you stop trying so hard to make it happen, and instead simply allow the natural movement towards sleep to unfold. In a village by a river lived a woman named Chiyo, who was a master weaver. She created silk fabric of exceptional quality, and her work was sought after by merchants throughout the region. Her patterns were intricate and beautiful, her technique flawless. She had learned weaving from her grandmother and had been practicing the craft for more than 20 years. Chiyo approached her weaving with intense focus and perfectionism. Every thread had to be precisely placed. Every color had to be exactly right. She would spend hours making sure the tension in her loom was perfect before beginning each piece. She believed this meticulous control was what made her work superior to other weavers. But this perfectionism came at a cost. Weaving, which should have been pleasurable, had become a source of constant stress. Chiyo's neck and shoulders were always tight from hunching over her loom. Her eyes strained from the hours of detailed work. She would lie awake at night mentally reviewing her current project, worrying about potential flaws, planning each step with anxious precision. One morning, Chiyo was working on a particularly complex piece commissioned by a wealthy family. The pattern involved dozens of colors in an intricate design. She had been working on it for weeks, and it was nearly complete. Just as she was threading a new shuttle, a thread in the warp suddenly tangled. This should not have been a major problem. Tangles happened occasionally to all weavers. They just needed to be carefully worked out. But when Chiyo examined this tangle, she saw it was not simple. Multiple threads had somehow twisted together in a way that seemed impossible. The more she looked, the more complex it appeared. It was right in the middle of her nearly finished work, and it would need to be cleared before she could continue. Chiyo began trying to untangle the threads. She worked carefully, trying to trace each thread back to where it had gone wrong. But her careful analysis only seemed to make things worse. In trying to free one thread, she would tighten another. The tangle, instead of loosening, seemed to grow more complex with each attempt to solve it. After an hour of frustrating work, Chiyo felt panic rising. This commissioned piece had a deadline. The family was expecting it in 2 weeks. If she could not untangle this mess, she would have to cut the threads and start over, losing weeks of work. Her fingers began to shake as she pulled at the threads with increasing desperation. The harder Chiyo worked, the worse it became. Threads that had been merely tangled were now knotted. Her anxious yanking was causing the fibers to fray. She was making the problem worse through her forceful efforts to fix it. She knew this intellectually, but her panic made it impossible to stop. She had to fix it. She had to fix it now. Finally, with tears of frustration in her eyes, Chiyo stood up and walked away from the loom. She could not bear to look at it anymore. The tangled threads seemed to mock her, a visible representation of her failure to control her craft. She walked out to her small garden and sat down heavily on a stone bench. Her neighbor, an old woman named Hana, who had once been a weaver herself, saw Chiyo's distress and came over. "What troubles you?" she asked gently. Chiyo explained about the tangle, her voice tight with frustration. "I have been working on it for hours. I know where each thread needs to go. I can see what needs to happen, but I cannot make it happen. The harder I try, the worse it becomes." Hana nodded with understanding. "And what would happen if you stopped trying?" "The tangle would remain. The piece would not be finished. I would fail." "Perhaps," Hana said. "Or perhaps the tangle knows something you do not." "What could a tangle know?" "Where the threads want to go." Chiyo looked at the old woman with confusion, but Hana just smiled and returned to her own garden. After sitting in the garden for a while, Chiyo felt her panic gradually subside. Her hands stopped shaking. Her breathing slowed. Without the immediate pressure of trying to fix the problem, her mind became clearer. She thought about what Hana had said. Where the threads want to go. What could that mean? Chiyo walked back inside and approached the loom, but this time she did not immediately start pulling at threads. Instead, she just looked at the tangle. Really looked at it without trying to solve it. She noticed that what had appeared completely chaotic actually had a certain structure. The threads were not randomly jumbled. They had followed some kind of path in creating this knot. Instead of trying to force the threads where she thought they should go, Chiyo tried something different. She barely touched one thread, just feeling how it wanted to move. When she gave it the slightest freedom, it naturally slid a bit in one direction. She followed this movement with the lightest possible touch, not pulling or directing, just allowing the thread to show her where it wanted to go. The thread slipped free of one loop. This created a small opening. Another thread now had room to move. Chiyo touched it gently, feeling its natural direction. It too slid free with minimal guidance. What had seemed hopelessly complicated began to loosen simply by allowing each thread to follow its own nature rather than forcing it where she thought it should go. Within 10 minutes, the entire tangle had released. The threads lay free, slightly crimped from where they had been knotted but otherwise undamaged. Chiyo stared at her hands in amazement. Hours of forceful effort had only made the problem worse. Minutes of gentle allowing had resolved it completely. But the lesson went deeper than just this one tangle. Chiyo realized that her entire approach to weaving, to her craft, to her life, had been like her first attempt with the tangle. She had been forcing everything to be exactly as she thought it should be, gripping so tightly to her vision of perfection that she was strangling the natural flow of her work. Over the following days, Chiyo began experimenting with a lighter touch in her weaving. Instead of tensing her shoulders and gripping the shuttle tightly, she relaxed and held things more gently. Instead of forcing every thread into precise position, she gave them slight freedom to find their natural place. The work that had been exhausting became easier. And strangely, the fabric she produced was more beautiful than her previous work, not less. Her commissioned piece was completed on time, and when the family saw it, they said it was the finest work she had ever created. There was a quality to it that her earlier pieces lacked. A certain life, a flow, as if the silk had woven itself with her as its gentle guide rather than its rigid controller. Chiyo's neighbor Hana came to see the finished piece. "You learned the tangle's teaching," she said with satisfaction. "I learned that force creates what it tries to prevent," Chiyo replied. "When I tried to make the threads go where I wanted, they only became more knotted. When I listened to where they wanted to go and helped them get there, everything released naturally." From that day forward, whenever Chiyo felt herself gripping too tightly, trying to force an outcome, she would remember the tangle. She would pause, breathe, and soften her approach. This did not make her less skilled or less accomplished. If anything, her work improved as she learned to cooperate with the silk rather than dominate it. Years later, young weavers would come to study with Chiyo, hoping to learn her techniques. She would show them the basics of the craft, but then she would say, "The real teaching cannot be explained in words. You must experience it yourself. Work until you encounter something that resists your force. Then stop forcing and start listening. The silk knows what it wants to become. Your job is to help it, not command it." The story of Chiyo the Weaver teaches something about the nature of problems and our usual approach to solving them. When we encounter difficulties, our instinct is to apply force. To push harder, to grip tighter, to increase our effort. We believe that obstacles require strength to overcome. But Chiyo discovered that this approach often makes problems worse rather than better. The tangled threads represented not just a weaving problem, but a life problem. When Chiyo tried to force the solution her mind had determined was correct, the situation became more complicated. Her forceful pulling, born of panic and the need to control, created exactly the outcome she feared. The threads became more knotted, not less. What resolved the tangle was a completely different approach. Instead of forcing the threads where she thought they should go, Chiyo listened to where they wanted to go. She gave them just enough freedom to follow their natural movement, and this natural movement led to the untangling she could not achieve through force. This teaching appears throughout Zen Buddhism in various forms. There is a recognition that reality has its own intelligence, its own way of unfolding, and our forceful attempts to control this unfolding often create resistance. When we push hard against life, life pushes back. When we flow with life's natural movement, problems often resolve themselves with minimal intervention. The distinction is subtle but crucial. Chiyo did not simply abandon the tangle and hope it would fix itself. She engaged with it, but with a completely different quality of engagement. Instead of forcing, she listened. Instead of commanding, she cooperated. Instead of gripping tightly to her plan, she remained responsive to what was actually happening. This wisdom applies directly to the challenges of finding rest and sleep. Many people approach bedtime difficulties the way Chiyo first approached her tangle. They see sleeplessness as a problem to be solved through force. They try harder to relax, grip more tightly to techniques, push forcefully against thoughts that arise. And, like the tangled threads, their sleep problems often become more complicated through these forceful efforts. The alternative is not to abandon all effort, but to change the quality of engagement. Instead of forcing sleep to happen, we can listen to what prevents it. Instead of gripping tightly to a rigid bedtime routine, we can remain responsive to what we actually need in this particular moment. Instead of pushing against wakefulness, we can gently allow our natural movement toward rest. When Chiyo stopped trying to make the threads behave and instead listened to their natural movement, the tangle released. When we stop trying to make ourselves sleep and instead listen to our body's natural rhythm, rest often comes more easily. Not through abandonment of all effort, but through a shift from force to cooperation. The teaching includes an important element of trust. Chiyo had to trust that the threads knew where they wanted to go, even when their path was not immediately clear to her analytical mind. She had to believe that gentle allowing would be more effective than forceful control, even though this contradicted everything her panic told her. Similarly, approaching rest requires trusting that our bodies have natural intelligence about sleep. We do not need to micromanage every aspect of the falling asleep process. We can create basic conditions and then trust the body's wisdom to move toward rest when we stop interfering with anxious control. As you settle even more deeply now, you might notice if there are tangles in your approach to this moment, places where you are trying to force something to be different than it is, gripping tightly to how you think rest should feel or when sleep should come. These grips create their own kind of tangle, making rest more elusive the harder you try to capture it. What might happen if you softened your approach the way Chiyo learned to soften her touch? What if you listened to where your body and mind want to go, rather than forcing them where you think they should be? What if you trusted that rest knows how to come, that sleep understands its own arrival, and that your role is not to command but to cooperate with this natural process? The tangle taught Chiyo that what appears hopelessly complicated often has a simple resolution when we stop forcing and start listening. Your rest tonight might teach you the same lesson. Not through struggle, but through gentle allowing. Not through control, but through trust. Not through force, but through the wisdom of letting go. In a small farming village lived a woman named Tomoko, who had devoted her entire life to her son Koji. Her husband had died when Koji was just a baby, and she had raised him alone, working tirelessly to give him every opportunity. From the time he was small, Tomoko had a clear vision for his future. He would become a scholar, perhaps even a government official. He would bring honor to their family and lift them out of poverty. Tomoko made great sacrifices to support this dream. She sent Koji to study with the village teacher even when she could barely afford food. She encouraged him constantly to work hard on his studies. She told him stories about successful scholars and officials, painting pictures of the life he would have. Every decision she made was aimed at helping him achieve what she believed he should become. But as Koji grew older, it became clear that his heart lay elsewhere. He loved the land. He wanted to be a farmer like his grandfather had been. When he talked about planting and harvesting, about the changing seasons and the feeling of soil in his hands, his face would light up with genuine joy. But when Tomoko pushed him to focus on his studies, his expression would close and he would grow quiet. Tomoko could not understand this. Why would he choose hard manual labor when he had the chance for a better life? She had given up everything to provide him opportunities she never had. His rejection of these opportunities felt like a rejection of her sacrifice, of her love, of everything she had worked for. As Koji approached manhood, the tension between them grew. Tomoko would lecture him about wasting his potential. Koji would argue that working the land was not a waste, but a calling. Their conversations became arguments. The arguments became bitter silences. The love between them was still there, but it was buried under layers of disappointment and resentment. When Koji turned 20, he announced that he was going to work on his uncle's farm in a neighboring village. He would not be continuing his studies. This was his decision and his life. Tomoko felt as if her world was ending. She had built every hope around a future that now would never happen. She felt betrayed, abandoned, lost. For months after Koji left, Tomoko was consumed by grief and anger. She had given him everything, and he had thrown it away. She replayed conversations in her mind, thinking of what she should have said differently. She imagined alternate paths where he had made different choices. She blamed herself for not pushing harder, for not explaining better. She blamed him for being ungrateful and short-sighted. The suffering was so intense that Tomoko could barely function. She stopped tending her small garden. She barely ate. She lay awake most nights, her mind churning with regret and disappointment. Her neighbors grew concerned and urged her to visit a wise woman named Sato, who lived at the edge of the village. Sato had once been married to a scholar and understood something about the pain of unmet expectations. Reluctantly, Tomoko went to see Sato. She poured out her story, her voice bitter with hurt. "I gave him everything. I sacrificed my whole life for his future. And he chose to be a simple farmer. How can I accept this?" Sato listened quietly until Tomoko finished. Then she asked a simple question. Who decided what Koji's life should be? "I did," Tomoko said without hesitation. "I am his mother. I know what is best for him." "Do you?" "Of course I do." "Then why is he farming and not studying?" Tomoko felt anger rising. "Because he is young and does not understand what he is giving up. Or because you do not understand what he is choosing," Sato said gently. Tomoko started to argue, but Sato raised a hand. "Tell me, when you picture Koji as a scholar, whose happiness are you imagining?" "His happiness, of course." "Are you sure? Or are you imagining your own happiness at having a son who is a scholar?" This question stopped Tomoko completely. She opened her mouth to protest, but realized she could not honestly answer. When she pictured Koji as a successful official, she saw herself feeling proud, respected, vindicated in her sacrifices. She saw the life she wanted him to want. But she had never truly asked herself if this was what would make him happy. When Koji talks about farming, Sato continued, "What does his face look like?" Tomoko had to admit that her son looked joyful when he talked about working the land. More joyful than he had ever looked when studying. "And when you pushed him towards scholarship, what did his face look like?" "Sad," Tomoko said quietly. "Trapped." So you have been fighting for years to make your son become something that makes him sad and trapped, instead of allowing him to become something that makes him joyful and free. And you call this love? Tomoko felt as if she had been struck. She had thought she was loving her son by pushing him towards success. But what she had actually been doing was trying to force him to fulfill her dreams, her idea of what his life should be. She had been loving an imaginary son, the one who wanted to be a scholar, while rejecting the real son who stood before her. But I wanted him to have a better life than I had, Tomoko said, tears streaming down her face. A better life, according to whom? Sato asked. You decided what better meant. You never asked him what it meant to him. Maybe for Koji, a life close to the land, working with his hands, feeling the sun on his back, is the best life possible. Maybe your version of success is his version of imprisonment. Over the following weeks, Tomoko struggled with this realization. Everything she had believed about her love for Koji, about her sacrifices, about her role as a mother, had to be reconsidered. She had thought acceptance meant giving up on him, admitting defeat. But slowly she began to see that real acceptance meant loving the son she actually had, not grieving for the son she had imagined. One day, Tomoko traveled to her brother's farm to visit Koji. She found him in the fields, his face tanned, his hands calloused, his expression content in a way she had never seen when he was studying. He looked up, surprised to see her, clearly expecting another argument. Instead, Tomoko said simply, "Tell me about your work. I want to understand what you love about it." The surprise on Koji's face gradually gave way to cautious hope. He began describing his days, the satisfaction of planting, the miracle of growth, the fulfillment of harvest. As he talked, Tomoko truly listened for the first time. She listened not for what she wanted to hear, not for evidence he was making a mistake, but for who her son actually was. What she heard was a young man who had found his calling, who worked hard and took pride in his work, who was happy. This was not the life she had imagined for him. It was better because it was his life, not hers. "I am sorry," Tomoko said when he finished. "I have been trying to force you to be someone you are not. I thought this was love, but it was just my fear and my own unfulfilled dreams. I see now that you are already exactly what you should be." Koji's eyes filled with tears. "You really mean that?" "I mean it. I was fighting you because you were not following my path. But it was never my path to choose. Can you forgive me?" The reconciliation between mother and son was gradual but genuine. Tomoko visited the farm regularly, learning about Koji's work, meeting his friends, seeing his life as it actually was, rather than comparing it to the life she had wanted for him. And something unexpected happened. As she released her grip on her expectations, the suffering that had consumed her dissolved. She had thought she would grieve forever if Koji did not become a scholar. But once she accepted reality as it was, the grief simply ended. She discovered that loving her actual son was far more satisfying than mourning her imaginary one. The relationship that had been poisoned by expectations became healthy and close when those expectations were released. Years later, when Koji married and had children of his own, Tomoko would watch him with his family and feel a peace she had never imagined possible. Her neighbor asked her one day, "Do you ever regret that Koji did not become a scholar?" Tomoko smiled. "I used to think I was fighting for his happiness, but I was actually fighting against it. The moment I stopped trying to change him into what I thought he should be, I discovered I already had what I wanted most. A son who is happy, healthy, and living a life true to himself. What more could a mother want? The story of Tomoko and her son touches on a source of suffering that Zen Buddhism addresses directly. The pain that comes from wanting reality to be different than it is. Tomoko was not a bad mother or a selfish person. She genuinely believed she was acting in her son's best interest. But she had confused her vision of what was best with what actually was best. She had created an image of her son's ideal life and then suffered when reality did not match that image. This pattern appears in countless forms throughout our lives. We have ideas about how our relationships should be, how our careers should unfold, how our health should be, how our lives should look. When reality does not conform to these ideas, we suffer. Not because reality is necessarily wrong, but because we are fighting against what is actually happening in favor of what we think should be happening. The teaching here is subtle but powerful. Acceptance does not mean approving of everything or becoming passive. Tomoko did not need to pretend she thought farming was superior to scholarship. She just needed to accept that her son was a farmer and allow that reality to be what it was. This acceptance did not require her to change her values. It just required her to stop trying to impose those values on someone else's life. What Sato helped Tomoko see was that much of her suffering came not from Koji's choices, but from her resistance to those choices. The choices themselves were neutral. A son farming rather than studying is simply a fact. The suffering came from Tomoko's story about what that fact meant, about how it reflected on her, about what future it implied. When she released that story and accepted the reality of who her son actually was, the suffering ended. Not gradually, not through long processing, but almost immediately. The suffering had been maintained entirely by her resistance to reality. When the resistance stopped, so did the suffering. This teaching from Zen Buddhism has direct application to rest and sleep. Much of our bedtime suffering comes from wanting our experience to be different than it is. We want our minds to be quieter. We want our bodies to feel more relaxed. We want sleep to come sooner. We want our day to have gone differently so we would not have these worries. These wants create a constant friction between what is and what we think should be. This friction is exhausting and prevents rest. We lie in bed fighting our actual experience, wishing it were some other experience, and this fight keeps us from settling into whatever is actually here. Like Tomoko fighting her real son in favor of her imaginary one, we fight our real experience in favor of some imaginary perfect state we believe we need in order to sleep. The alternative is not to pretend everything is fine or to give up on having preferences. It is to accept what is actually present in this moment without adding the layer of suffering that comes from wishing it were different. Your mind might be active right now. Accepting this does not mean liking it or endorsing it. It just means acknowledging it without fighting it. This simple shift from resistance to acceptance often allows the active mind to naturally begin settling on its own. Tomoko discovered that accepting her son as he was did not mean losing him. In fact, it meant truly finding him for the first time. Similarly, accepting your experience as it is does not mean staying stuck in that experience forever. It often means creating the conditions for natural change. When we stop fighting sleeplessness, sleep often arrives. When we stop resisting our active mind, the mind often quiets. Not always, but often enough to notice the pattern. As you continue settling more deeply, Notice what you might be resisting about this moment. What do you want to be different? What should your experience be instead of what it is? These wants create suffering not because your preferences are wrong, but because they put you at war with reality. And reality, like Koji choosing his own path, will be what it is, regardless of how much we fight it. What might happen if you practiced Tomoko's hard-won wisdom? If you accepted this moment exactly as it is, including any wakefulness, any active thoughts, any discomfort? Not approving of it necessarily, but just allowing it to be what it is without the added layer of resistance? In that acceptance, you might find the same peace Tomoko discovered. Not the peace of getting what you want, but the deeper peace of no longer fighting what is. In a mountain monastery lived a monk named Ryokan, who suffered from chronic pain in his lower back. The injury had occurred years earlier when he slipped on ice while carrying wood. The initial damage had healed somewhat, but a deep ache remained that never fully went away. Some days it was mild, a dull background sensation. Other days it was sharp and limiting, making even simple movements difficult. For years, Ryokan had been fighting this pain. He tried various treatments and herbal remedies. He adjusted his posture constantly, trying to find positions that would not aggravate the injury. He avoided certain movements and activities. Most of all, he resented the pain deeply. It felt like an enemy that had invaded his body and would not leave. This resentment colored everything. During meditation, instead of settling into stillness, Ryokan would be acutely aware of the discomfort in his back. He would shift position frequently, searching for relief that never came. During work periods, he would move carefully, always guarded against triggering more pain. At night, he would lie awake, feeling the ache, wishing desperately that it would go away. The pain itself was difficult, but Ryokan's relationship to the pain made everything worse. He felt like the injury had stolen his life. Before it happened, he had been strong and capable. Now he felt broken and limited. The pain was a constant reminder that his body had failed him, that he was less than he should be. Other monks noticed Ryokan's suffering. They would suggest he try to accept the pain rather than fight it, but these suggestions only frustrated him. How could he accept something that hurt? How could he make peace with an injury that limited his ability to practice? Acceptance sounded like giving up, and he was not ready to surrender to this unwanted condition. One winter, an old monk named Sengai came to stay at the monastery for a few months. Sengai was known for his wisdom and his direct teaching style. He noticed Ryokan's constant discomfort and the way his face would tighten whenever his back bothered him. One evening, Sengai asked Ryokan to join him in his quarters. When Ryokan arrived, the old monk gestured for him to sit. "Tell me about your pain," Sengai said simply. Ryokan felt suddenly defensive. "What is there to tell?" "My back hurts. It has hurt for years. I wish it did not hurt." "Describe it exactly." "What do you mean?" "The pain. Describe it precisely. Not your thoughts about it or your wishes about it. Just the sensation itself." Ryokan hesitated. He had spent years thinking about the pain, hating it, trying to escape it. But he had never simply observed it without judgment. He closed his eyes and tried to pay attention to the actual sensation in his back. "It is like a deep ache," he said slowly. "Centered in my lower back on the left side. It feels tight, like something is pulled too taut." Does it move or stay still? Ryokan paid closer attention. It shifts slightly. It pulses a bit with my heartbeat. The intensity changes. Is it hot or cold? Neither, really. Just pressure and ache. And right now, in this moment, how intense is it? Ryokan noticed something surprising. Right now, it is not very strong. Maybe 3 out of 10. But you have been suffering all day as if it were much worse, yes? Ryokan realized this was true. He had been carrying the memory of the pain's worst moments, the fear of those moments returning, and the resentment about having the pain at all. These mental additions were creating more suffering than the actual physical sensation in this present moment. I want you to try something, Sengai said. For the next week, whenever you notice pain, I want you to describe it precisely to yourself the way you just did with me. Do not judge it or wish it away. Just observe it exactly as it is. Can you do this? Ryokan agreed, though he was skeptical about what this would accomplish. Over the following days, he practiced what Sengai had taught him. Each time he became aware of his back pain, instead of his usual pattern of tightening against it and wishing it would stop, he would pause and simply observe it. What he discovered surprised him. The pain was never as constant or as intense as he had believed. It came and went in waves. It changed quality and location. Some sensations he had labeled as pain were actually just tightness or fatigue. And when he observed the pain without fighting it, the suffering that normally accompanied the pain was much less intense. One afternoon, Ryokan was sitting in meditation when a sharp twinge went through his back. His immediate instinct was to tense against it, to shift position, to curse the injury. Instead, he tried Sengai's practice. He observed the sensation precisely. Sharp, yes. Located in a specific spot. Lasting for perhaps 3 seconds before fading to a dull ache. Then mostly gone. The sensation was unpleasant. But when Ryokan did not add his usual layers of resentment, fear, and resistance, it was just a sensation. Unpleasant but manageable. And more importantly, temporary. It came, peaked, and passed. He did not need to make it mean anything about his life, or his worth, or his future. When Ryokan met with Sengai again, he tried to explain what he had discovered. The pain has not gone away, but somehow it matters less. I am not fighting it constantly, so I have more energy for other things. Tell me, Sengai said, what is the difference between pain and suffering? Ryokan had to think about this. Pain is the physical sensation. Suffering is what I add to it. The story I tell about what the pain means. The fear of it getting worse. The resentment about having it. The wish that it would go away. And which hurts more? The suffering, Ryokan admitted. The pain itself is just sensation. The suffering is what makes it unbearable. So, all these years, you have been fighting the wrong enemy. You have been trying to eliminate the pain when what was actually tormenting you was your relationship to the pain. Over the following months, Ryokan's life changed significantly, though his physical condition remained largely the same. He still had pain in his back. Some days were worse than others, but he had stopped adding suffering to the pain. When it hurt, he would acknowledge the sensation without making it mean he was broken or damaged. He would work with his limitations without resenting them. He would rest when he needed to without feeling like a failure. His meditation deepened because he was no longer constantly at war with his own experience. His work became more satisfying because he was fully present with it rather than distracted by resistance to discomfort. His sleep improved dramatically because he was no longer lying awake fighting sensations or worrying about pain. One day, a young monk came to Ryokan complaining about a recurring knee injury that was interfering with his practice. Ryokan listened with deep understanding. "I know how you feel," Ryokan said. "I have lived with back pain for years. But I can tell you that the pain itself is not your biggest problem. Your suffering about the pain is what will truly limit your life if you let it." How do I stop suffering about it? You do not stop suffering about it through force. You stop adding suffering to it. You notice the difference between the actual sensation and all the stories you tell about that sensation. The sensation will be what it is, but the stories are optional. That seems too simple. It is simple, but not easy. Your mind will want to fight the pain, to resent it, to wish it were gone. You have to patiently, again and again, just feel the sensation without the fight. Over time, this becomes natural. And you discover that you can live fully even with pain, as long as you are not also living with constant war against that pain. Years later, visitors to the monastery would sometimes remark that Ryokan seemed unusually peaceful despite his obvious physical limitations. When asked about this, he would say, "I learned to distinguish between what hurts and what I add to the hurt. One is unavoidable. The other is optional." Choosing not to add suffering to pain does not eliminate the pain, but it eliminates most of what makes pain unbearable. The story of Ryokan and his chronic pain illuminates a teaching that appears throughout Zen Buddhism. The distinction between pain and suffering, between what actually is and what we add to what is through our resistance and stories. Ryokan's physical pain was real. The injury had happened, the damage remained, the sensation was genuine. But most of his torment came not from the pain itself, but from his relationship to it. When Sengai asked Ryokan to describe the pain precisely, he was teaching a form of acceptance that is often misunderstood. Acceptance does not mean liking something or approving of it. It does not mean giving up on improvement or becoming passive. It means acknowledging what is actually present without adding layers of resistance, resentment, and story. What Ryokan discovered through this practice was that the pain itself occupied a relatively small space in his awareness when he did not surround it with fight and fear. The physical sensation was there, yes, but it came and went, changed intensity, was sometimes barely noticeable. His suffering had been constant because he was fighting the pain constantly, even when it was mild or absent. He was living in fear of pain's return, in resentment about its presence, in grief about his lost capabilities. All of these mental additions created a suffering that was often worse than the physical pain itself. When Ryokan learned to feel the actual sensation without the story, he discovered that the sensation was manageable, unpleasant, but not unbearable, present, but not all-consuming. The same pain that had tormented him for years became just another part of his experience, no longer the center of his suffering. This teaching has profound relevance to how we approach any unwanted aspects of our experience, especially as we prepare for rest. Many of us lie in bed with various discomforts. Physical tension, mental activity, emotional unease. Our instinct is to fight these sensations, to wish they were not present, to see them as obstacles to sleep. But like Ryokan's relationship to his pain, our fight with these discomforts often creates more suffering than the discomforts themselves. We tense against tension, creating more tension. We resist our active mind, giving it more energy. We make our unease mean something terrible about our ability to rest, adding story and fear to what might just be temporary sensation. The alternative Ryokan discovered is not to pretend discomfort is not there or to force ourselves to like it. It is to acknowledge it without fight, to feel it precisely without story, to allow it to be present without making it mean we cannot rest. This shift from resistance to acknowledgement often allows discomfort to naturally begin releasing, though that is not why we do it. We do it because the resistance itself is exhausting and prevents rest. As you settle even deeper now, you might practice what Ryokan learned. If there is discomfort present, physical or mental, try observing it the way Sengai taught. Describe it precisely to yourself. Where is it located? What is its exact quality? How does it change from moment to moment? This observation without judgment is a form of acceptance. Not approval, just acknowledgement. You might discover, as Ryokan did, that the sensation itself is more manageable than your fight with the sensation. That pain is just pain, tension is just tension, thoughts are just thoughts when you stop adding the layer of resistance that says they should not be here. In this acceptance without fight, rest becomes possible even in the presence of imperfect conditions. Not because the conditions change, but because you stop requiring perfect conditions before allowing yourself to rest. In a remote monastery lived a nun named Miyoko who had devoted herself to Zen practice for 15 years. She spent hours each day in formal sitting meditation, followed strict schedules, and studied complex teachings about the nature of mind. She believed that enlightenment required extraordinary effort and special practices that went beyond ordinary life. Miyoko particularly looked down on the daily work periods that were part of monastery life. She saw washing dishes, sweeping floors, and preparing food as necessary duties that took time away from real practice. She would rush through these tasks with her mind elsewhere, counting the minutes until she could return to her meditation cushion where the real spiritual work happened. The head teacher, a woman named Eshin, noticed Miyoko's divided relationship with monastery life. She saw how Miyoko treated meditation as sacred and work as mundane, how she brought complete attention to formal practice and minimal attention to daily tasks. One day, Eshin made an announcement that puzzled everyone. She was assigning Miyoko to be the monastery dishwasher for the next 6 months. This would be her only responsibility. No formal meditation, no study, no teaching. Just washing dishes after every meal. Miyoko was devastated. 6 months of her precious practice time would be wasted on menial labor. She tried to argue that this assignment would set back her spiritual development, but Eshin was firm. "This is your practice now," was all she would say. The first day, Miyoko approached the washing with resentment. 3 large meals for 40 people meant mountains of dishes, pots, and utensils. She rushed through the work, her mind churning with frustration. This was not why she had become a nun. She was meant for higher things, not standing at a wash basin scrubbing rice pots. Days turned into weeks. Miyoko continued to rush through the washing, treating it as an obstacle to overcome rather than an activity in itself. Her hands would be in the water while her mind was anywhere else, rehearsing meditation instructions, planning what she would do when these 6 months were finally over, feeling sorry for herself. About 6 weeks into her assignment, Miyoko was washing the breakfast dishes when she noticed something. Her hands were red and sore from the hot water and repeated scrubbing. But she had not really been aware of this until now. She had been so busy being elsewhere mentally that she had not noticed her body's experience. For the first time, she actually paid attention to what washing dishes felt like. The warmth of the water, the slippery texture of the soap, the weight of a bowl in her hands, the sound of water splashing against clay. These sensations had been present all along, but she had never really experienced them because her attention was always somewhere else. Something shifted in that moment. Miyoko stopped trying to finish quickly and just washed one bowl. Then another. She felt the roundness of each bowl, noticed the slight differences in weight and glaze. She felt the exact pressure needed to remove stuck rice. She heard the small music of bowls clicking against each other as she stacked them to dry. The work itself began to reveal a certain rhythm and pattern. There was a right way to stack the dirty dishes, so the washing went smoothly. A most efficient motion for scrubbing that felt good in the body. A satisfaction in seeing something dirty become clean through simple, repeated action. Over the following days and weeks, Miyoko found herself looking forward to washing time. The work that had seemed like torture became something else entirely. Not a distraction from practice, but a different kind of practice. Her mind, which had raced constantly during formal meditation, became quiet naturally while washing dishes. Her body, which had been tense with striving during sitting practice, relaxed into the simple movements of wash, rinse, dry. She noticed things she had never seen in 15 years of formal practice. The way thoughts would arise and pass on their own without her needing to fight them or follow them. The simple satisfaction of completing one task before moving to the next. The way being fully present with something simple and repetitive created a kind of peace that all her elaborate practices had never quite achieved. One day, while washing after the noon meal, Miyoko had a sudden, profound realization. She had been searching for something extraordinary through her meditation practice, believing that enlightenment was a special state she needed to achieve through special methods. But what if it was not extraordinary at all? What if it was right here in the ordinary act of washing a bowl? Not the idea of washing or the spiritual significance of washing, but just the simple, direct experience of hands in water, bowl being cleaned. In that moment, the bowl in her hands was the entire universe. Not as a poetic thought, but as a direct experience. There was no Miyoko separate from the washing. There was just this moment of washing happening, complete in itself, requiring nothing more. When Miyoko went to see teacher Eshun that evening, she could not find words for what had happened. Finally, she just said, "I understand now why you gave me this assignment." Eshun smiled. "Tell me what you understand." "I understand that I have been making practice complicated because I thought spiritual awakening had to be something special and difficult. But washing dishes with full presence is the same practice as sitting meditation. Maybe deeper because there is no goal, no sense that I am doing something spiritual. Just washing because dishes need to be washed." "And where is enlightenment?" Eshun asked. Miyoko held up her work-roughened hands. "In these hands, in this water, in this bowl. It has been here all along. I was just too busy looking for something extraordinary to notice it. When Miyoko's 6 months of dishwashing ended, Eshun asked if she wanted to return to the regular schedule of formal practice. Miyoko thought about this carefully. "I would like to continue washing dishes," she said. "But now I see it is the same as any other practice. Whether I am sitting in meditation or washing bowls or sweeping floors, the practice is the same. Bringing full attention to this moment, this action, without adding the mental complexity of trying to achieve something special." Over the years that followed, Miyoko became known not as a great meditator or scholar, but as someone whose presence had unusual depth and simplicity. Visitors to the monastery would sometimes ask her for teachings, and she would bring them to the wash basin. "This is all I can teach you," she would say, handing them a bowl to wash. "If you can bring your full attention to washing this bowl, you will understand everything you need to know. If you cannot, then no amount of meditation or study will help you." When students would protest that this seemed too simple, that surely there must be more to spiritual practice than washing dishes, Miyoko would smile. There is both more and less. More in the sense that every single moment of your life is practice, not just the ones you label as spiritual. Less in the sense that all the complexity you think is required is just your mind making simple things difficult. The story of Miyoko and the dishes reveals a teaching that sits at the heart of Zen Buddhism. The extraordinary is not separate from the ordinary, but found within it. Miyoko spent 15 years searching for something special through elaborate practices, never seeing that what she sought was present in the simple acts she was rushing through in order to get to her real practice. The dishwashing assignment from teacher Eshun was not a punishment or a test of obedience. It was a direct pointing to where awakening actually exists. Not in special states achieved through special methods, but in the direct, uncomplicated experience of whatever is happening right now. Washing a dish, taking a breath, feeling water on your hands. These simple experiences are complete in themselves. They do not need to be transformed into something else or used as stepping stones to some future realization. What changed for Miyoko was not the activity itself, but her relationship to it. When she was rushing through dishwashing to get to meditation, both the washing and the meditation were incomplete. She was never fully present anywhere because she was always trying to be somewhere else. When she finally brought full attention to the washing itself, not as a means to anything but as a complete experience, she discovered the peace she had been seeking through all her elaborate practices. This teaching confronts our usual approach to spiritual development and self-improvement. We believe that growth requires adding more. More techniques, more knowledge, more practices, more effort. But Miyoko's breakthrough came through subtraction. She stopped adding the mental layer of trying to achieve something and returned to simple, direct experience of what was already present. The same pattern appears in how we approach rest and sleep. We treat sleep as something that requires special preparation and technique. We distinguish between the important activity of sleeping and the ordinary activities of the day. We bring complexity and effort to something that is actually simple and natural. What if rest is like dishwashing for Miyoko? Not something requiring elaborate preparation, but something available in the simple act of lying down when tired. Not a special state we must achieve through technique, but a natural process that happens when we stop adding complexity. Not separate from ordinary life, but woven through every moment we are willing to be present with what is actually here. The teaching suggests that we already know how to rest. We have been doing it since we were infants. But we have learned to make it complicated through our accumulated ideas about how it should be done, our goals for how we should feel, our judgment of whether we are doing it right. if we could set aside this complexity, even temporarily, and return to the simple, direct experience of tiredness and rest, we might find what Mayoko found at the wash basin. As you continue settling, you might notice what complexity you are adding to this simple moment. Are you trying to achieve something special called perfect relaxation? Are you treating rest as a stepping stone to sleep rather than complete in itself? Are you labeling this moment as mundane compared to some future moment when you will actually be asleep? These additions create the same division that Miyoko experienced between washing and meditating. They prevent you from being fully present with the experience you are actually having right now. What remains when you subtract these additions? Just this. Just the simple fact of lying down, of breathing, of resting. Complete in itself, requiring nothing more, already the peace you have been seeking through effort and complexity. Miyoko discovered that enlightenment was not in some special experience, but in the ordinary experience of washing a bowl with full attention. Your deep rest tonight might not require any special achievement, but just this ordinary experience of being present with rest itself, without trying to make it something other or better than what it already is. In a village near the sea lived a young monk named Ren, whose greatest difficulty was sitting meditation. While other monks could sit still for hours, Ren's legs would become restless within minutes. A powerful urge to move would build until he could barely stand it. His mind would race with thoughts about how he should be able to sit still, judgments about his lack of discipline, comparisons to other monks who sat so peacefully. His teacher, Master Soen, had tried various approaches to help Ren with this difficulty. Different cushion heights, different postures, different breathing techniques. Nothing worked. After 20 minutes, Ren would be in agony, not from physical pain, but from the overwhelming need to move. He felt like a failure as a student, convinced that something was fundamentally wrong with him that prevented proper practice. One day, Soen decided to try something completely different. Instead of meditation instruction, he gave Ren a new assignment. For the next month, I want you to walk. Just walk. Around the temple grounds, through the forest, along the beach. Walk slowly, paying attention to each step. This will be your entire practice. Ren was relieved at first. Anything was better than the torture of sitting still. But he also felt ashamed. Walking meditation was what they gave to beginners or to people who could not handle real practice. He felt he was being demoted, given an easier practice because he was too weak for the challenging one. The first day, Ren walked with his usual restless energy. He moved quickly, his mind churning with the same thoughts that plagued his sitting practice. Why was he so bad at this? What was wrong with him? Would he ever be able to sit properly? The walking felt like busyness, just movement to fill time, not real practice. But as days passed and Ren continued walking for hours each day, something began to shift. The sheer repetition of one step after another started to quiet his mind. There was nothing to achieve in walking. Nowhere to get to. Just this step, then the next, then the next. His legs, which had been so restless during sitting, found a natural rhythm in movement. Ren began to notice subtle things about walking. The way his weight shifted from one foot to the other. The engagement of different muscles with each step. The movement of his arms, the turning of his hips, the way his breath synchronized with his pace. Walking was not simple at all. It was a complex coordination of countless micro-movements, all happening naturally without conscious control. After about 2 weeks, Ren was walking along the beach when he became aware of something unexpected. Despite being in motion, there was a quality of stillness within him. His body was moving, but at the center of his awareness, something was completely still. It was like the eye of a storm, peaceful while everything around it moved. This discovery fascinated him. He had thought stillness was something that happened only when sitting motionless. But here was stillness present even while walking. The movement did not disturb the stillness. The stillness did not prevent the movement. They existed together, not in conflict, but in harmony. Ren began exploring this quality of mobile stillness. He found he could walk faster or slower, and the internal stillness remained. He could walk on rough ground or smooth paths, uphill or downhill, and that centered quietness stayed constant. The stillness was not dependent on his body being motionless. It was something deeper, something that could include motion within itself. One day, Master Soen joined Ren on his walking practice. They moved together in silence along the forest path. After a while, Soen said, "Tell me what you have discovered." "I thought stillness required the body to be still," Ren said. "But I have found a stillness that remains even when moving. It is not in my body. It is in awareness itself." "And where do you find this stillness?" Ren paused to sense more deeply. "At the center, like the hub of a wheel. The rim moves, but the center is always still." Soen nodded. "Now, can you find this same stillness while sitting?" The question surprised Ren. He had not thought about applying what he learned while walking to sitting meditation. That evening, when the other monks went to sit, Ren joined them. But he approached it completely differently. Instead of trying to force his body to be still and fighting his restless energy, he brought the centered awareness he had found while walking. His legs still wanted to move. But now, instead of seeing this as a problem to overcome, Ren simply noticed the sensation of wanting to move from that still center. The urge was there, like a wave passing through. But the stillness that observed the urge was not disturbed by it. He did not need to act on the urge or suppress it. He could just let it be there, a sensation among sensations, not a command he had to obey. For the first time, Ren sat for an entire meditation period without struggling. His body was still, but only because he was not fighting his natural energy. He had found the place that remained centered regardless of what his body wanted to do. The stillness he had discovered while moving was available while sitting, not as something he achieved, but as something he recognized was already there. After meditation, Soen asked him how it went. "I finally understand," Ren said. "I was trying to create stillness by forcing my body not to move. But stillness is not about the body. It is about awareness. When I rest in that centered awareness, my body naturally settles. And when it wants to move, that is fine too, because the stillness is not disturbed by movement. So you needed to learn about stillness through movement before you could find it in motionlessness," Soen observed. "Yes. If I had just kept trying to sit, I would have kept fighting my nature. By allowing myself to move and finding stillness within movement, I discovered that stillness is not the opposite of movement. It includes movement within itself." Over the following months, Ren continued to practice both walking and sitting meditation. But now there was no division between them in his mind. Both were explorations of the same centered awareness. Sometimes he would walk, sometimes sit, sometimes just stand still and feel the quality of stillness that was always present regardless of what his body was doing. Other monks who struggled with restlessness during meditation would sometimes ask Ren for advice. He would tell them, "Do not fight your energy or your impulse to move. Find the stillness that is not disturbed by these impulses. It is like a clear sky that is not changed by the weather passing through it. The impulses to move are weather. The stillness of awareness is the sky. Learn to rest as the sky rather than identifying with the weather." When people would ask how to find this stillness, Ren would say, "Try walking meditation first. Move, but bring full attention to the movement. Notice that even while moving, something in you is not moving. Something is simply observing the movement with perfect steadiness. That is the stillness I am talking about. Once you find it while moving, you can recognize it while sitting or standing or doing anything at all." Years later, when Ren became a teacher himself, he was known for his unique ability to help students who could not sit still. He understood from his own experience that the problem was not their bodies, but their relationship to their bodies. They were trying to force stillness from the outside rather than recognizing the stillness that was already present inside. "Your body might want to move," he would tell them. "That is fine. Bodies have energy and impulses. But you are not just your body. You are the awareness that knows the body wants to move. Rest in that awareness. From there, you can let the body be still or let it move, and either way, you remain centered in the stillness that is never disturbed." The story of Ren and his discovery of stillness within movement reveals a teaching about the nature of inner peace. Most of us believe that peace requires the absence of movement, difficulty, or challenge. We think we can only be calm when conditions are calm. But Ren discovered that true stillness is not disturbed by outer circumstances or even by our own inner restlessness. What Ren learned through walking was that stillness is not a state we create through force or control. It is a quality of awareness itself. Just as the hub of a wheel remains motionless even when the rim spins rapidly, the center of our awareness remains still even when our bodies, minds, or circumstances are in motion. This teaching has profound implications for how we understand peace and rest. We often wait for perfect conditions before allowing ourselves to feel peaceful. We think we need our minds to be completely quiet, our bodies to be perfectly relaxed, our circumstances to be just right. But this approach means we are always waiting for peace rather than recognizing the peace that is already here at the center of our experience. Ren's struggle with sitting meditation came from trying to force his body into a state that felt unnatural to it. His energy wanted to move, and he was fighting that natural impulse because he believed stillness required motionlessness. When he was given permission to move and discovered stillness within movement, he learned that what he had been seeking through force was already available through recognition. The teaching applies directly to our approach to rest and sleep. Many of us lie awake because we are fighting our experience. Our mind is active, and we think this means we cannot rest. Our body feels restless, and we believe we must force it to be still. But, like Ren discovered, the peace we seek does not require our experience to be different than it is. It exists at the center in the awareness that can observe both activity and stillness without being disturbed by either. When Ren learned to rest in centered awareness while his legs wanted to move during meditation, the urge to move gradually settled on its own. Not because he forced it, but because he stopped adding the tension of fighting it. Similarly, when we rest in awareness while our minds are active or our bodies feel restless, these energies often naturally begin to settle without force. The key is the shift from trying to create stillness to recognizing the stillness that is already present. This stillness is not something we achieve. It is what we are, beneath all the activity and motion. Like the hub of the wheel that Ren described, it is the unmoving center around which everything else revolves. As you rest even more deeply now, you might sense this center that Ren discovered. Not by trying to create it, but by noticing that something in you is observing all your experience without being caught up in it. Your mind might be somewhat active. Your body might have sensations or impulses. But the awareness that knows these things is itself calm, steady, unmoved by what it observes. This is the stillness that Zen Buddhism points to. Not the stillness of forced suppression or rigid control, but the natural stillness of awareness itself. When you rest in this awareness, rather than trying to control your experience, you might find that rest deepens naturally. Not because you made it happen, but because you stopped preventing it through the effort of trying to force conditions that you thought you needed before allowing yourself to rest. Ren's discovery transformed his practice by showing him that stillness and movement are not opposites but complementary aspects of a larger whole. Your rest tonight might deepen through the same discovery. That the activity you notice and the rest you seek are both present together, not in conflict. And the awareness that includes both is already the peace you have been seeking, available right now, waiting for you to stop looking past it towards some imagined future state. Let yourself settle completely now. Feel how your body is already releasing, already knowing what to do. Notice how breathing continues without your management. Trust the process that has brought you safely through every previous night of your life. The teachings you have heard tonight are not new information to memorize, but reminders of what you already know. That peace is here. That rest is natural. That letting go is not loss, but return. Each of these teachings points to the same truth approached from different angles. The peace you seek is not in the future, not in achievement, not in perfect conditions. It is here, now, in this simple moment of rest. Available not through force, but through allowing. Not through control, but through trust. Not through accumulation, but through release. Your breathing continues. Your heart beats. Your body rests. These happen without your conscious direction. The same natural intelligence that manages these processes knows how to bring you into sleep. You do not need to help it. You just need to stop interfering with your well-intentioned but unnecessary efforts to control what already knows how to unfold. As you drift deeper into rest, you can let go of everything these teachings have pointed to. The burdens you carry, the need to control outcomes, the habit of living anywhere but now, the force you apply to what wants to flow naturally, the resistance to what already is, the complexity you add to what is simple, the tension in awareness that wants to be effortless, the fight against surrender that keeps you from the peace of letting go. One by one, let these fall away, not through effort, but through recognition that they are optional. You do not need them tonight. They might have served you during the day, though probably not as well as you imagine. But now, in this time of rest, you can release them like leaves falling from autumn trees. Gently, naturally, without force or drama. Just letting go because it is time to let go. The Zen teachings you have received tonight are complete. Not because you understand everything or remember every detail, but because understanding and memory are not what transform us. Presence transforms us. Trust transforms us. Release transforms us. You have practiced all three tonight through simply listening, breathing, settling. Now there is nothing more to do. No more teachings to receive. No more practices to apply. Just this moment of complete rest. Your eyes can close fully if they have not already. Your breathing can become as slow and deep as it wants to be. Your body can release every remaining bit of tension it is ready to release. Your mind can become as quiet as it becomes without you forcing or measuring. Sleep will come in its own time. Not because you earned it or achieved it or did everything right, but because sleep is what naturally happens when we stop preventing it, when we trust it, when we let go into it the way Master Soshin let go into death, with curiosity and peace and the recognition that some things are beyond our control, and that is actually fine. May your sleep tonight be deep and restorative. May you rest in the peace that has been here all along, beneath your busy thoughts, beneath your worries and plans, beneath even your desire for rest. May you awaken refreshed, carrying some whisper of what you have learned tonight into your waking hours. May you remember, if only dimly, that peace is not something to achieve, but something to recognize. Already here, already yours, already complete. Feel yourself sinking deeper now into whatever supports you. Notice how your body has already been releasing without you tracking each change. Your shoulders have dropped. Your face has softened. The weight of your body has settled more completely into rest. This happened by itself. This is how natural processes work when we stop interfering. Your breath continues its gentle rhythm. In and out. Rising and falling. Each exhale a small letting go. Each inhale receives what comes next without effort. You have been breathing this way your entire life. Tens of thousands of breaths taken and released without your conscious management. This same natural intelligence that breathes you, that beats your heart, that heals your wounds, this intelligence knows how to bring you into sleep. You can trust it completely. Not because someone told you to trust it, but because it has proven trustworthy every single night of your life. You have fallen asleep thousands of times. You have released into rest, let go of the day, surrendered control, and awakened renewed. Tonight is no different. The same process that has carried you safely into sleep all those times is here now, ready to receive you. There is nowhere you need to go. Nothing you need to become. No state you must achieve before allowing yourself to rest. This moment, exactly as it is enough. Your body, exactly as it feels right now, is enough. Your mind, with whatever thoughts still move through it, is enough. Everything is already sufficient for rest. The stories you heard tonight were mirrors, reflecting what you already know in your deepest being. That peace is not earned, but recognized. That rest is not forced, but allowed. That the freedom you seek comes not from changing everything about your life, but from changing your relationship to your life. These truths are not new to you. They have always been present, waiting beneath the noise of your busy thoughts. As you settle even deeper, you might notice how little effort this requires. How rest wants to come. how your body naturally moves towards sleep when you stop blocking its movement. Like water finding its level, like leaves falling when autumn comes, like the tide returning to shore. These things happen through their own nature, not through force or will. Let yourself be carried now, carried by the breath that breathes itself, carried by the body that knows how to rest, carried by awareness that remains gently present even as everything else softens and quiets. You are safe here. You are held. You can let go completely. If thoughts still arise, let them. They are just weather passing through the sky of awareness. If your body has sensations, let them be. They are just experiences happening in this moment, not problems requiring solutions. If sleep has not yet come, that is fine too. It will come when it comes. Your only task is to remain here, present and releasing, trusting what has always been trustworthy. The peace you have touched tonight through these teachings is not something you will lose when you awaken. It is not dependent on this particular state or this specific moment. It is your fundamental nature, always available, always present beneath whatever is happening on the surface. You can return to it any time, simply by remembering what these stories have pointed to. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.